Well, I know you're enjoying another wonderful meal and conversation, and we have a special treat for you this evening. Once again, we have the opportunity, you don't see it on your screen yet, to bring you the colors from Texas A&M, and we're very proud to be able to continue our footsteps in space. You know, this year we celebrate the 50th anniversary of Apollo, and of course the Manned Space Flight Center started in Houston, Texas, and it drew its original scientists and engineers from all over the country, but we also focused on Texas, and Texas A&M was a big part of that, along with the rest of the community. Rice, I see Rice out there. We worked with the University of Houston to eventually start a graduate school out at the Johnson Space Center. It was called University of Houston Clear Lake, which has now gone to 4 years. So an investment in academia has always been a strong part of the NASA tradition. And so I'm going to bring up another speaker here from Texas A&M that has actually a long and storied history with human space flight, along with people like Dr. Susan Bloomfield at A&M and some of the others. And also we'll talk about something very special that we're doing at A&M. We're actually, how many of you remember the centrifuge that used to be at UTMB? We got a few people. Hurricane Ike and budget cuts helped to put that in storage. But we are actually building an annex, a partnership between two colleges at A&M, and we're going to resurrect the centrifuge and install it at Texas A&M in the spring. And we hope that one of those researchers will be Dr. Melinda Sheffield-Moore, who's now the professor and department head at the Department of Health and Kinesiology. And so I hope that you give her a warm welcome. Thank you.
Howdy. So at Texas A&M, one of our traditions to start any talk is to say howdy. Please feel free, however, because at Texas A&M, the word howdy when you introduce yourself at the beginning of a talk is to bring silence to the room. However, please enjoy your drinks and your food. And when I was invited to give this talk, so I want to begin by saying thank you to Dr. Bonnie Dunbar as well as Mr. George Abbey for this unbelievable opportunity to sort of share with you the years of association and affiliation that I've had with space medicine and spaceflight physiology. And it's quite a story, and I'm not much of a me person, so it was really difficult for me to do this in about 15 minutes. So we're going to jump all over the map because I want to tell you a little bit about myself and give you some context as to why I'm even here. And then I would like to share with you some of the history of how I grew up in this area, and then also share with you, as Bonnie suggested, some of the ways that my experiences both at UTMB as a professor of medicine, as well as now as a department head at Texas A&M, how we're growing these partnerships, these interinstitutional partnerships, to be able to meet some of these unmet challenges associated with this new conversation of deep space. So I'm going to begin. As you can see from the title, if I didn't just mess things up, which I did, as you can see from the title, we have I want to talk about whether we intend to take some small leaps, some small steps, or some giant leaps, and how we can do that. Deep space is a fun conversation to have, but there's a lot of engineering challenges, and there's certainly a lot of space medicine and physiology challenges that need to be addressed. And we hope to do that at Texas A&M with our new centrifuge, as well as with the teams of investigators that we are forming in order to meet these challenges. So in the beginning, as you can see, this is a picture of Johnson Space Center in 1963. And so my father was a graduate of Trinity University in San Antonio, and he was invited to come work at ILC. I don't know if any of you NASA folks remember ILC, and to work on the Gemini program. He was a mathematician. And when we first moved to the area, as you can see, there wasn't a lot there. In fact, I grew up duck hunting in the rice fields surrounding Johnson Space Center, and grew up kayaking in Clear Lake and looking into the skies at the T-38s that were taking off and landing at Ellington, in those days, Ellington Air Force Base, which is now Ellington Field. So for those of you that were around during those days, I was not. So 1963, I wasn't yet born. But when we moved to this area, this is a lot of what it looked like. There wasn't a lot yet that was occurring. But the excitement, even from a very young age, that I felt having my father work in the industry, and then me eventually growing up near the industry and then also joining it, the excitement was palpable in those days. I'd like to talk about whether and how I envision, so that's the context. So why am I up here speaking on this? What lends me the credibility to do this? So as I was telling Bonnie, in 1990, I took a job after I had gotten my bachelor's degree at Texas A&M. I did a master's at U of H, started working as an experiment support scientist, where I met many of you and recognized many of your faces, but because I've gotten older, I can't remember your names now. And so I worked in a time that was unbelievable. It was during the Space Lab Life Science time. So I was fortunate enough to work on Space Lab Life Sciences 1 and 2, IML 1 and 2, Space Lab J, D2, etc. And during that time, we made giant leaps in our understanding of what was happening in terms of spaceflight physiology and where we were going to go and how we were going to address astronaut health. As you can see from this depiction, it's been 50 years since the Apollo program, and the depiction says Apollo 50, next giant leap. So what is our next giant leap going to be? And that's, as Bonnie described to me when she and George asked me to do this talk, I thought, I'm not sure I have the same knowledge that many of you have, but I do have a perspective, and I'd like to share with you my perspective on how I've approached spaceflight physiology. And I've done that from the early days with the SLS 1 and 2, et cetera, with sort of an exercise background. So physiology, I love the integration of physiology, and so there's no better way to study the integration of physiology other than with exercise or an extreme environment like microgravity. But my first love was flight. And when I grew up watching astronauts flying T-38s above Clear Lake, landing at Ellington Field, I wanted to fly. And that's really all I wanted to do. But physiology led me down this path, and the associations and affiliations that I then took on after I left NASA, and because I wanted to be able to be a PI, I wanted to be able to be a co-I, I wanted to be able to impart my own ideas that I learned collaborating at NASA with engineers and with nutritionists in order to be able to address some of those unmet challenges. And so, you know, in the conversation of deep space, we have to think about how we're going to exercise astronauts. And we have exercise equipment constraints, and I'm not telling you in this audience anything that you don't already know. We're restricted by volume and mass and power. We're restricted by what ifs if equipment breaks. Do we need both an aerobic and resistance exercise, or can we get away with just one? There's also possible performance limitations. Astronauts get tired of exercising as much as we would need to have them exercise. And importantly, are we too risk averse to take these next leaps? Do we have that ability to go back to where we were and take the many risks that we did in the early days? I can't answer that question, but when it was shared to me that this was an open forum to share opinions, that concerns me because I think we have some real opportunities, and I want to talk about that. So we know that we have no shortage of explorers willing to accept risk. Many of them are in this room, and it doesn't have to be astronauts or cosmonauts. I think if we were to put out a poll, we'd probably find many individuals who'd be willing to go to Mars that aren't affiliated with the space programs that we have across these many nations. But one of the things that I think has become clear in my research is that exercise can't be the only option that we think about if we're going into deep space. And the reason I say that is because from the significant amount of groundwork that we've done, we know that musculoskeletal loss and functional loss that occurs in astronauts in 180-day missions, et cetera, is significant. And my background in clinical research as it is associated with cancer cachexia and the sarcopenia of aging has shown me that it doesn't take much to tip individuals over that, quote, metabolic edge, if you will, and put them in an unhealthy state. And these are the real conversations that we need to have, and that things like the centrifuge and some of these teams that we can pull together at Texas A&M will help us address some of these issues. We know that exercise blunts atrophy. It does. It's synthetic to skeletal muscle, but there's also many other medications that are synthetic to skeletal muscle. And so if we just were to use exercise, we could expect with 180 days, which we have data existing, an 11 to 17% decrease in muscle strength, 10% decrease in muscular endurance, and a 2 to 7% decrease in bone mineral density. Those are significant. In a clinical patient, those are extremely significant. And it's a real conversation that we need to have. So let's talk about what we know. We know that there are reductions in fitness and health. We know that they affect cardiovascular, bone, muscle. We know that radiation's a risk, but is that also one of those giant leaps that we're willing to take? Exercise is logistically problematic, but we have an opportunity because we have a vast amount of data with exercise that allows us to complement it as a countermeasure. And when I say that, what I mean is we always should have exercise. And I think that we that have done these many years of studies related to exercise and spaceflight, whether it's a ground-based study or a flight study, and I've also participated in flight studies. I participated in a protein turnover study with John Glenn on his return to space. And so we looked at things like exercise and what its effects on protein turnover are. And what we see is that exercise is an excellent model. But we have a real opportunity with the knowledge that we've gained from other medical circumstances, whether it's cancer cachexia or whether it's a northern elephant seal that I study that pulls itself out of the ocean for 3 months and doesn't eat or exercise. We have many models that show us what happens with long-term inactivity that can help us decide and figure out what are the mechanisms and what do we need to do to counteract those mechanisms. My contention, and again, this is just my contention, is that we do need complementary countermeasures. We need personalized pre-flight countermeasures using things like proteomics in order to be able to assign individualized exercise regimens, but also pharmacologic regimens that complement exercise. And again, we must be willing to increase our risk tolerance. I was fortunate enough a few years ago to, when I was at the University of Texas Medical Branch and we still had the Flight Analog Research Unit, to investigate the skeletal muscle proteome before and after a 70-day bed rest experiment. These were all healthy young men, middle-aged. I think they were 35. And we were selected based on our use of testosterone to complement exercise. And my primary collaborator, Randy Urban, and he was chair of medicine at the time, and I was one of the directors of the Clinical Research Center. And we had done many, many years of research on the anabolic properties, the safety, the efficacy of testosterone in hypogonadal men, in cancer patients, in the sarcopenia of aging, and other areas before we frankly had the guts to put a protocol into NASA, because we didn't think NASA would accept testosterone as a countermeasure, because testosterone unfortunately has been bastardized, if you will, by athletes in the sense that they've taken it and it's a normal hormone in the male and female body, and it's been taken by athletes and has negative connotations from a health perspective. And so we never submitted a proposal, worried that NASA would be not willing to take that leap. And so after several years of publishing papers in the Journal of Clinical Endocrinology and Metabolism on all manner of patient populations, we finally took that leap and we submitted, and we were approved. And we were approved to do a study in, we had 4 arms. I'm going to present to you only 3 of those, and I'll tell you why. So the arms were a control group and a placebo-controlled group, a placebo plus exercise group, because again, we need exercise, and a testosterone plus exercise group. One of the reasons we were selected was because of the unique way in which we deliver testosterone. So we had given it for so many years in clinical patients that we knew how to deliver it in a way that was safe and efficacious, that did not increase the risk of some of the androgenic side effects that occur with testosterone. Bonnie told me a story a few days ago about how a conversation, and I hope you don't mind if I share this, that a conversation she recalls having with Carolyn Huntoon about testosterone and its use in flight, and how they joked that whether or not it would cause these androgenic side effects. Would it cause facial hair growth? Would it cause a deepening of the voice? And one of the things that we do that makes our studies so unique is that we cycle it. And we cycle it in a way, in this particular study, that we were able to prevent losses in lean body mass over the 70 days of bed rest. Again, this is testosterone plus exercise. And what you can see is that this blue line here is the exercise plus testosterone group. The green group is the exercise group. So exercise does a nice job of maintaining lean body mass. The control group, as you can see, did not fare well at all. But the first thing I'm sure that's coming to your mind is, well, how much testosterone did you give them? Did you give them super physiologic levels of testosterone? No, we didn't. We gave a standard dose that we had administered to clinical patients, and we cycled it. So we gave it on and off, on and off. Because my background is in metabolism and mass specs, we knew from years of research that if we gave testosterone and we measured muscle protein synthesis before and after a period of time on testosterone, if we gave it in a continuous fashion, that it wasn't as effective as if we gave it and withdrew it. And so we gave it and withdrew it. Skeletal muscle protein turnover, protein synthesis loves to see that burst of testosterone because that's how it is released in the human body normally. And so muscle is responsive to that initial exposure, and then you withdraw that so that you allow eugonadal levels and release of testosterone to occur normally, so that we're not blocking that and trying to then replace on top. So as you can see in this right panel, the green and red are the control and the exercise. And you'll see that with the administration you get an increase, that's the blue line, and then as you withdraw it, you get a decrease. And then it will go up again and down again, and up again and down again and up again. And it's that stimulation of the injection that allows protein turnover to occur and do so in a way that is safe and efficacious. So we took muscle biopsies before, during, and after this bed rest study. And those muscle biopsies gave us the opportunity to look at some proteomics of the skeletal muscle. So we knew that we were able to have a positive impact on lean body mass. We had functional data in terms of muscle strength, and to compare to what was happening to the individual proteome cell signaling pathways that we knew already were responsible for muscle protein synthesis, but also were responsible for suppressing muscle protein breakdown. So one of the key components to testosterone is not just its anabolic component. In many cases, in a clinical population, the anti-catabolic properties of testosterone are more important, which is why you see athletes using it. They're not using it to get bigger. They're using it to suppress inflammation. They're using it for recovery. They're using it to get back out on the field quicker and sooner to repair skeletal muscle and turn it over more quickly. And so that's how we are using this in this cycled fashion that allows the muscle to see that stimulation, allows it to suppress breakdown when you're in an inactive mode like spaceflight or a non-gravitational mode. So what we did was we looked at the muscle proteome. And you can see this is the post-principal component analysis. So it's just a clustering, it just kind of shows us the clustering of the data. So you can see that the blue group, which is the testosterone plus exercise group, all forms in this clusters pretty well. The exercise group clusters very well. And then the control group here. So this is the total protein abundance. If we look at how the phosphorylation of many of those proteins like myosin heavy chains and actin light chains and some of those structural, metabolic, and mitochondrial proteins that are important for muscle health are changed, we see that we have this wonderful ability with proteomics to group individuals. So we know ahead of time if we give you this testosterone plus exercise, you're going to look pretty similar to your other testosterone plus exercise groups, with a few exceptions. Some individuals don't respond like everybody else. Some individuals are really high responders, and some individuals are low responders. The same thing goes for testosterone that goes for exercise. Some people respond and get big really and have really positive protein turnover responses to exercise, and some individuals don't have as much, but they've done the same volume of work. And so we see the same thing with testosterone. But if you look at these particular individuals, and I've put these boxes around them, these individuals are kind of on the fringe, if you will. And that fringe is where it gives us the ability to draw some conclusions about what we think would happen and what would be the best countermeasure, or in this case, complementary countermeasure for a particular person that's going to go into deep space. So if we study you on the ground before flight, we can take a look at this and see from your proteomic profile, from that omics data, whether it's best that you do exercise, whether it's best that you do exercise plus testosterone, whether perhaps that you, in fact, are more susceptible in terms of a certain type of functional test, maybe your ankle flexion or perhaps your knee extension. And so that's what we saw. If you look at our functional data, we showed that the changes in leg strength correlate very well to the changes in lean leg body mass. And so you can start to see some of these fringe individuals, number 16, number 20, some of those that I had circled previously. And those that were on the fringe had a very either poor response in the control group, or an excellent response in the exercise group, or an excellent response in the testosterone group. And that begins to allow us to draw conclusions. Not definitive conclusions, but it allows us to begin to speak about how we might be able to better direct data and countermeasures. So for example, control 4, had a large loss in lean body mass, was the second highest loss in knee extension strength, and the greatest loss in knee flexion, and also the greatest loss in calf strength. So that individual needs quite a lot of intervention. So if this person's going to go into space, we're going to have to come up with some multiple ways in order to protect that individual. If we look at 16 and go back, so 16 responded on exercise alone very similarly to a testosterone complementary person. So that person may not need to take testosterone to go into a longer duration spaceflight process. That person, exercise may be all that they need. And so as you can see, we begin to be able to draw conclusions on the data. The subject number 20 had increases in lean body mass, slight increases in knee extension, and large increases in flexion and calf strength. If we link the omics data to the functional data, it suggests that that person is a good candidate for a testosterone and exercise, but maybe we don't need quite as much cycling of testosterone. That person seems to be a good responder. It allows us to draw conclusions. So in summary for our proteomics data, the 70-day bed rest model for spaceflight resulted in significant changes to the skeletal muscle proteome. Pre-bed rest proteome principal components analysis for protein abundance suggested that the groups were nicely mixed with a few notable subjects on the external parts of the cluster. In the post-bed rest period, that's what I showed you. You saw that they were nicely grouped with a few of those notables. And once we started digging back at those particular individuals to see what their metabolomics look like, to see what their hormonal profiles look like, to see the many different things and their functional responses, then we can begin to model that data and figure out what the best approach will be for those individuals for a complementary countermeasure. So in conclusion for the proteomics section, proteomics may provide a pre-flight selection of personalized countermeasures to complement exercise on deep space missions. So we know that mission durations are going to continue to increase. Spaceflight presents us with this unique challenge to astronauts, engineers, scientists, the individuals that we want to be addressing these questions. I do, at the bottom of my heart, believe that exercise still needs to be our functional approach, but I believe that we need to add different approaches that we know are complementary to exercise to help our astronauts and cosmonauts and others go into deep space and to remain functional and healthy. So if we're going to Mars and we want to use pre-flight proteomics to select personal astronaut countermeasures for these long duration space flights, why not use our centrifuge? Why not test individuals at our human clinical research facility and look at some of these other countermeasures that complement exercise? In the early parts of my career, I did some work where we looked at the effect of enhancing skeletal muscle blood flow. So when you vasodilate skeletal muscle, and I gave a TED talk on this, when you vasodilate skeletal muscle with a drug like sildenafil, which is Viagra, you get muscle growth, confirmed with proteomics, confirmed with mass spec data. There are other methods that we have to complement exercise that can help us maintain lean body mass, help us maintain function, help us maintain metabolic health in skeletal muscle. So at Texas A&M University, This has been what I would imagine is going to be my final chapter in my journey through how I've conducted spaceflight research and the many wonderful things and affiliations and associations that I've had with NASA throughout the years. We're a top-ranked research institution with strong military connections. We're only 100 miles from Johnson Space Center. It's a quick drive, and we've managed to pull many of the great astronauts that we've had in the astronaut corps for many years to Texas A&M University. We're the only land, sea, and space grant in Texas, and we're one of 17 in the nation. We have a cadre of scientists, engineers, nutritionists, physiologists, you name it. We have them, and we're poised to do the research to meet some of these unmet challenges so that our multidisciplinary teams can make positive giant leaps towards deep space. 2 years ago, we opened this facility called the Human Clinical Research Facility. And having been at NASA UTMB for 20 years as a professor of medicine, to come to this facility, to come to this institution and see what this institution had developed with a facility that has 12 beds, that has full biomedical capabilities, with areas for testing, all manner of studies that we could do. And what Dr. Dunbar was saying is this particular facility that you see on the right, just to the right side is where we're building the centrifuge. We're connecting the centrifuge to this biomedical research facility, which will give us the ability to bring in, which we're already doing, aerospace engineers, nutritionists, and others to study some of these intractable problems. This short-arm centrifuge was given to Texas A&M University. Dr. Bonnie Dunbar was able to get that through the NASA Space Act agreement. We've also gotten an MMed through the Stevenson-Widler Act, and we're in the process of getting some of the FARU beds from my prior institution so that we can begin doing some bed rest studies to test some of these mechanisms. But more importantly, we're putting tremendous effort into developing academic, industry, and governmental partnerships to bring some of these activities to Texas A&M. We're bringing an Army lab to Texas A&M. We're in conversations with Lockheed Martin to bring activities to Texas A&M. We have a whole manner of individuals that are poised to do this research, and we'd love for you to give us a shout. So this short-arm centrifuge facility will open in the spring, I believe, 2020. These physiologists, nutritionists, and engineers are collaborative individuals, and we welcome research opportunities. Texas A&M and its team of collaborators is driving us into the future of space medicine, one giant leap at a time. Join us in making many more giant leaps. Thank you very much. I'm happy to take questions. This is our multidisciplinary team at A&M, and it's only a small group of the individuals that we have. And I'm sure you'll recognize many of those names from individuals that conduct medical physiology experiments, basic science experiments, and others that have been affiliated with NASA and NASA research for many years. Thank you.
Questions? David Alexander back. Okay.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. I was just wondering if you have any thoughts on the use of human growth hormone in these kind of studies. There's a university in Scotland that approached me who studying with athletes, and they found that a secondary effect was increased cognitive performance. Mm-hmm. So does that fit in with your testosterone studies, or what do you think about HGH, at least in small doses?
I'm glad you asked. So one of the things that, one of my areas of research that I have been doing in collaboration with UTMB for the past probably 5 or 6 years is in traumatic brain injury. So traumatic brain injury is one of those unmet challenges in clinical populations that have extreme fatigue, and about 30 to 40% of those patients are growth hormone or neuroendocrine insufficient. And so my primary collaborator, Randy Urban, who was the chair of medicine at UTMB and is now the vice dean of research, for many years was administering growth hormone to those individuals, replacement doses, and was seeing significant improvements in cognitive function, reductions in strength, and we've moved that area on to how we can assess cognitive function as it relates to the gut microbiome through the gut-brain axis. So we're doing some of that work now. Growth hormone is tricky because it has to be injected, and it is unlike testosterone. It's not easy to measure because of the way that its diurnal nature, et cetera. And so you have to do specialized testing to even determine whether someone is growth hormone deficient. And so we use things like IGF-1 and other things that we know are directly related to growth hormone, but it's an imperfect science right now. And that's why we have the knowledge to advance with things like testosterone. I don't think we're there yet with growth hormone. There's no doubt it's anabolic to skeletal muscle, but growth hormone affects a lot of different tissues, and so we're just not quite there yet. But from a cognitive standpoint, you're right. You hit the nail on the head. It absolutely has and does show improvements in cognitive function in traumatic brain injury patients.
I have a question. Did you give the same dose of testosterone independent of base level of this patient? Because we understand the base level can be very different, and it is different things. And another question, did you analyze behavior of your patient? Because, of course, we know that testosterone have great influence on behavior.
Sure.
Thank you.
Great questions. Thank you. So the first one, what was the first one? We analyzed, what was it? Basal levels, yes. So our all subjects were eugonadal. So we picked individuals that were within about the 500 to 1,000 nanogram per deciliter. They did not all obviously have the same starting dose, but there was no significant difference between the group of 8 that we had in that group. We measured their levels throughout the bed rest, and we also, as we made it through the NASA IRB, were required to follow behavior, because as I mentioned earlier, there was concern that because testosterone in higher supraphysiologic doses has the potential to induce negative behavioral consequences, that was one of the things that we were required to measure. But keeping in mind that our doses, in that one particular slide, there was no statistical difference between the doses in any of the individuals. The nanogram per deciliter level of serum testosterone was the same across all 3 groups. The mechanism is that hit, if you will, where muscle sees that higher dose of testosterone that comes in, and then as testosterone is cleared, you get some that obviously stays in the lipid, in the fat, and it's slowly released, and so you get that continued benefit until you get the next injection. And so from a behavioral standpoint, our dosing kept those individuals at a eugonadal level. No one exceeded any of the subjects exceeded, I think, 1,000 nanograms per deciliter, which is a normal. The 500 to 1,000 is in the normal range.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, thank you very much, Dr. Sheffield-Moore. for a little bit about the centrifuge, we're in the process now of working with KBR to do the inventory at JSC and condition assessment. We are building the building. We hope to finish in March of next year, and we'd like to do a dedication during, we are hosting the International Gravitational Physiology Conference in May. I think it's May 31st is where we'd like to invite everyone up to help join us. And in the defense of the conversation that I had with Dr. Huntoon, that's okay. So it's somewhere in the 80s, and for those of you who remember, I had an animal lab in Building 37 where I was studying disuse osteoporosis, and Dr. Huntoon was head of the biomedical labs, and any paper that came in that had to do with bone loss, she would shuffle my way. And there was a paper that came in, her proposal on administering testosterone to all the astronauts, but without the benefit of the last 30 years or so of research. And so we looked at it, and maybe in hindsight we should have given it a closer look, but we didn't have all the tools to know that it might have been beneficial. But we were concerned because we just started bringing women into the astronaut office, and so it seemed a little risky at that time. So I do miss having Dr. Huntoon here as well. She was a great influence on my career. Thank you once again, and we'll welcome you to A&M when we open the centrifuge. Thank you.